What if Gojo turned evil or went completely insane? You may think the concept of evil Gojo is boring because he would just destroy everybody. And you're right, kinda. That's the thing about alternate timelines though, there are literally endless possibilities. Because when it comes to characters that have every right to become a villain, Satoru Gojo is definitely up there. And trust me when I say, some of these scenarios are crazy interesting and do not play out anything like how you think, especially when we get on to discussing Shibuya. So remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel because it really does help a lot. Like, really, my financial situation is looking worse than Toji's right now, so please just do me a favor. Anyway, let's get started. I think we should start at the beginning with the hidden inventory arc. Let's be real, before Awakening, Gojo was an arrogant, spoiled, and entitled brat. But then Bossman Papaguro showed up and absolutely wiped the floor with both Gojo and his edgy emo boyfriend. Oh, and he also shot that poor little girl in the head, but like, who really gives a shit about that? God knows Gojo didn't, dickhead. A lot of people like to talk about a scenario where Gojo is the one who turns evil and Geto is the one who remains, well, mentally stable. But I think that's unrealistic because Geto was already going delulu due to his whole toilet rag swallowing technique, which I must say is very understandable. What I think is much more likely though is that both Gojo and Geto lose their minds together and decide that the monkeys need to die. After all, at the beginning of the arc, Gojo was the one complaining about having to protect the weak, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that he too adopts Geto's mass murder mindset. And so the pair of them would leave Jujutsu Society behind and begin their mission of deleting all of those useless muggles from the face of the earth. Okay, I say the pair of them, but come on, let's be real, what the fuck would Geto contribute to this? Gojo is literally gonna do it all himself. Geto for real just gonna be turned into a housewife and be like cooking him meals and shit. Now with Toji dead and Gojo having awakened his true power, there is not a single sorcerer alive who could possibly oppose them. So yes, this is a very clear-cut case of Gojo turning evil and then straight up winning. In fact, I would actually say this is the least probable scenario and definitely the most boring. But is this the only scenario where he could slightly lose his mind? No. So let's move on to some way more interesting situations, and I mean way more. Chapter 10 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Satoru Gojo sits in a morgue staring at the lifeless corpse of one of the most promising and pure-hearted students he has ever had, Yuji Itadori. The Jujutsu higher-ups went behind Gojo's back and sent the first years on a suicide mission which pissed Gojo off beyond belief. In fact, in the chapter, Gojo even says that he might just go and kill off all of the Jujutsu higher-ups himself so that he can reset Jujutsu Society. And even Shoko admits that she has rarely seen Gojo get that worked up about something. In the canon timeline, Gojo keeps a level head and decides against this because he has a dream. A dream where he nurtures the new generation to become the change that he wishes to see. In our alternate timeline though, things don't go down quite as smoothly. And the trigger for this is that in our timeline, Yuji isn't the only body lying in that morgue, but Nobara's too. His two new first years had their youth taken away from them by the higher-ups during their very first mission, and he was not there to do anything about it. Obviously, Yuji is lucky enough to be revived by Sukuna, but that doesn't change what's going through Gojo's mind at that moment. All of the trauma and hatred and isolation will build up and he would eventually snap. Keeping a level head is no longer an option for Gojo, so he stands up without saying a word and decides that he will do it himself. All the higher-ups, the conservatives, and the upper factions of the big three clans. He would decide that they all need to die right here and now, including his own family, which I found would parallel Geto's defection quite nicely. He starts off with the higher-ups that ordered Yuji and Yuta's execution, but that simply will not be enough. As soon as word gets out that Gojo has finally turned against them though, a notice is sent out to all sorcerers and big clans that Satoru Gojo is now considered a special grade threat which must be executed immediately. So as Gojo tears his way through the Kamo clan and his very own Gojo clan, his students, including Yuta and Yuji, prepare to make a stand against him. And yes, I wholeheartedly believe they would oppose Gojo's violent actions. Yuji's mindset at that point revolves around people having a proper death, and Gojo is delivering a very crappy death to hundreds of people, some of whom won't have even actually done anything wrong, at least not directly. Yuta will recognize that Gojo is not in his right mind and see him making the same mistakes that Geto made. His experience with Gojo and Geto in JJK0 is what will turn him against Gojo, as well as choosing to support his friends. Maki wants to eradicate the Zenin clan herself, and Megumi is driven purely by his own morals. So I believe that these two would also take a stand against Gojo, but it's a little bit more up in the air with them. They're kind of a moral grey area sometimes. All of his other Tokyo students will likely just be against mass murder in general and see it as their duty to try and stop it. And Hikari, well, Hikari won't really know, nor would he give a single shit shit, so screw Hikari. Sorry, gambler. So when Satoru Gojo is done annihilating everybody else, he will finally pull up to the Zenin headquarters, and he will find that all of his students will already be waiting to confront him at the main gates. This is obviously a problem for Gojo, because the last thing he wants to do is harm any of his students. Even though he's not quite in his right mind, that is his motivation after all. They will undoubtedly try to talk no jutsu him out of it, which might actually work and make him concede. But the other option is that he ignores them and annihilates the Zenin clan anyway. Yuta Okotsu is the only one of them there with a domain expansion that could potentially trap Gojo, but it isn't likely to do that much at all, and Gojo would simply need to knock them all out, or even use a 0.2 second domain expansion to render them all unconscious. Basically, assuming Gojo doesn't concede, the Zenin would still be annihilated. But this does low-key work out. Like, think about it. Gojo wants the new gen to be better and change Jujutsu society. Him sacrificing his authority and worthiness to lead them by killing off the old generation will wipe the slate clean. His students then banding together to oppose him would also mean that he has somewhat succeeded at raising them to be better, which means they are ready to take over those leadership positions and officially reset that Jujutsu society. Everything would actually kind of work out at the expense of Gojo's life. Obviously, he won't literally die, but none of his students will follow him, and he will only become more and more alone. All in all, I think this scenario is actually very interesting, and we were way closer to this actually happening than you realize. Gojo does deadass sit there and deliberate this decision. As much as I love this scenario though, the next one is without a doubt the best and most action-packed scenario possible. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's dive right into what would have happened if Gojo snapped in Shibuya. So let's reset the clock once again. Everything in Jujutsu Kaisen plays out the exact same way it does in the canon material, until 8:31 PM when Satoru Gojo arrives in Shibuya. 9 minutes later, at 8:40 PM, Gojo confronts Jogo and Hanami on floor B5. Sometime within the next 10 minutes, Gojo then crushes Hanami to death against the station wall. Gojo realizes that their plan was to lure him here and surround him with civilians in order to prevent the use of any big moves and a domain. Kenjaku estimated that there is only a 1% chance that Gojo chooses to use his domain expansion, but as we all know, Kenjaku was wrong. As Jogo and Chozo kill more and more innocent people, Gojo gets angrier and angrier. All that trauma and isolation builds up yet again. He knows that all these people are dying simply because these villains needed a way to beat him. The final straw for Gojo, though, was Mahito's arrival along with his horde of transfigured humans that cut down everybody in their path. Mahito's taunting made Gojo's mind go blank. He refused to play along with their little game any longer. So instead of keeping calm and using a 0.2 second domain expansion, Gojo snaps. He yet again enters that state he was in when he killed Hanami and let Jogo threaten all of those people. To put it in very simple terms, no fucks given. And so the strongest sorcerer of the modern era began his rampage. He doesn't even bother with a domain because it would risk curse technique burnout. He simply used a blue enhanced high-speed movement to target Jogo first, and in doing so he quite literally ran through the innocent bystanders, A-Train style. Before he could so much as scream, Jogo's severed head hit the floor and was crushed only moments later under Gojo's footsteps as he approached Mahito. Knowing that he can't touch Jogo, Mahito surrounded himself with transfigured humans in a desperate attempt to protect himself. And that was when Gojo did it. And with that, he detonates a red strong enough to reduce half the station to dust. 50% of Mahito's transfigured humans get reduced to dust, along with even more of the human bystanders. But Gojo simply does not care. He is done playing games. Now, upon realizing that Gojo had resorted to completely decimating the station, Kenjaku fled with his tail between his legs in order to seek out his last chance at subduing Gojo. But we will get to that shortly. Unfortunately though, Gojo had not forgotten about Chozo. So before turning his attention back to Mahito, Gojo pulls Chozo in with a blue so aggressive that it even rips out the wall behind him, which crushes even more of the remaining civilians and transfigured humans. Unable to resist, Chozo is pulled towards Gojo, who then slams his fist all the way through his chest, just like what Sukuna did. And for good measure, he fired a small red blast at the very same time, which then sent Chozo flying straight back across the station and turned him into a red splat on the wall. Sorry Chozo, I love you, but it's for the video. Rest in peace. With Jogo, Chozo, and all of Mahito's goons out of the way, that leaves only Mahito, which means that Gojo can finally unleash his trump card. Mahito's brain will get cooked and render him unable to use a curse technique, meaning that a red, blue, or if Gojo is feeling super hyper, a purple will actually put Mahito out of his misery for good. And with that, Gojo leaves the station and brings his rampage to the rest of Shibuya. What Gojo will find out very soon though, is that this won't be anywhere near as easy as he expected. You see, as Gojo was demolishing floor B5, Kenjaku went out to enact his backup plan. Even in the canon timeline, Kenjaku and Mahito explain that the backup plan for dealing with Gojo, should Prison Realm fail, is unleashing Ryomen Sukuna. And as we also know from the canon timeline, once Gojo has been sealed, Kenjaku actually does make his way to Meimei and Yuji. So if Kenjaku simply did that same thing but way earlier and then kept on going, he would inevitably run into Meimei and Yuji Itadori. Now, timing is very key here, so Kenjaku would either kill Meimei as soon as possible, or scare her enough to make her just straight up leave with Ui Ui and abandon Yuji. We already know that Yuji cannot hold a candle to Kenjaku at this point in the story, so he gets beaten low diff and has all 10 fingers in Kenjaku's possession force-fed to him. And with that, a 14-finger Sukuna will temporarily awaken in Shibuya. Kenjaku informs Sukuna that Satoru Gojo is going on a rampage in Shibuya, which is all he needed to hear. I mean, sure, this may not be Sukuna's plan to take down Gojo for good, but it was a good opportunity to test the waters and throw some hands. After all, he would be an entire 13 fingers stronger than the last time they fought. Meanwhile, Gojo has promptly taken care of most of the rogue curse users and curse spirits that have been let loose in Shibuya. Best believe anyone lucky enough to escape Gojo's onslaught will never be seen again. With Gojo clearing shit up and Sukuna's presence suddenly appearing, all of the other sorcerers are given the order to withdraw and create a perimeter guard around the outer barrier, which means that the entirety of Shibuya is now one big battlefield for a 14-finger king of curses and a mentally unhinged bloodlusted Gojo to face off. Assuming that fingers are equal to output and cursed energy, Sukuna will only be at 70% of the strength that he was in Shinjuku, and he will also be on a time limit because Yuji will eventually get control again. However, Gojo will not have a small barrier domain due to not being inside the prison realm, which means that he will only have an inverted barrier to contest Malevolent Shrine. Now, there is literally no way to actually scale Sukuna fingers at all, so I'm gonna do what all hardcore power scalers absolutely despise and just make an assumption based on literally nothing. I think Sukuna will have output low enough to yet again stalemate Gojo's inverted barrier for 3 minutes. I know this didn't happen in Shinjuku, but because of the lower output, I think it will here. But with this battle being a very short-term thing without much time for planning, I deadass do think this fight goes either way, which means there are only 2 possible outcomes here. Sukuna will kill Gojo with Malevolent Shrine, or Gojo will beat Sukuna or at least survive long enough for Yuji to take over his body yet again. What's funny though is that the good guys could actually low-key win either way, at least in the short run, because if Sukuna beats Gojo, then sure, Gojo is gone, but Sukuna is still locked up in Yuji with no guarantee that he will be able to take over Megumi. Mahito is dead, so Kenjaku doesn't really have any immediate way of starting the culling games either, and by that extent, if Gojo survives, then Kenjaku still can't start the culling games, and is even more fucked because as soon as Yuji tells Gojo about Geto, he will hunt him the fuck down. Like, best believe he will go after that man so hard. I admit though, in the very rare case that Gojo dies to a 14-finger Sukuna within that time limit, then I'm sure Sukuna will eventually still find a way to take over Megumi, and then everybody else is so unbelievably cooked. Overall though, I know this what-if scenario is unrealistic and completely fucking ridiculous, but I had a lot of fun making it, and I hope a lot of you will enjoy watching it too. My mindset is kind of that if you're gonna make a what-if video, then you might as well go all in and chuck logic out of the window. The whole point is entertainment after all. So, on that note, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Feel free to join the Discord and follow me on Twitter, links below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in a bit.